the individual concerned has been charged separately with offences relating to terrorism after a terrorism manual was discovered at his property, along with the components to make the toxic substance ricin. And now, as a result of that, the individual has been charged with terrorism offences, although this has not been declared to be a terrorist incident.
The thing I should talk to you about, the sort of almost a political row that's developed 3 months on from the Southport stabbings. The Times puts it as claims of a Southport cover-up. Can you explain to us what happened yesterday? The most senior figures in government became aware, we believe, of the possibility of new charges against the suspect in the Southport murders in the past few weeks. Some of those have come to light. Explain what happened and why this is particularly sensitive and has been controversial.
So there is somebody who's been charged in relation to the Southport killings. They're due to face trial in 2025, and so we're going to be very careful not to prejudice anything that criminal investigation, so that individual can face a fair trial, and that trial can go ahead without any prejudice. But I think that the row relates to, of course, what happened in the summer. There were claims at the time that the police weren't detailing whether this was, whether there was a terrorist element to this case. Particularly, it came from the likes of Reform UK's leader, Nigel Farage. Of course, it was an incredibly sensitive time. As a result of what happened in Southport, we saw misinformation spread online that led to violent clashes up and down the country with police and against, in one case, a hotel with asylum seekers was set on fire as a result of that misinformation being spread. But now, of course, it has come to light that the individual concerned has been charged separately with offences relating to terrorism after a terrorism manual was discovered at his property, along with the components to make the toxic substance ricin. And now, as a result of that, the individual has been charged with terrorism offences, although this has not been declared to be a terrorist incident, because the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police is making the argument that it's impossible to find a motive. That's brought, of course, criticism from the likes of two leadership candidates, Tory leadership candidates, Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, who are saying, well, did the police withhold information from the public? Number 10 of them had to hit back and deny any claims that information has been withheld or there's been any cover-up. I'm sure there'll be a larger debate, but that time is not for necessarily for now, while we wait a trial for the individual. But how do the police respond? What, of course, could be classed in this way by the investigating authorities. That debate, I'm sure, will be had at some point once the criminal proceedings have been brought to a close.
Absolutely. Theo, thank you for explaining it all for us. Times Radio's political correspondent, Theo Usherwood.
Yesterday, we learnt that the man charged with the murder of 3 girls in Southport is also facing separate charges for possession of the biological toxin ricin and material relating to the militant Islamist organisation Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organisation Al-Qaeda. Axel Rudakubana will appear in court today, meaning that speculating on the case could put publishers in contempt of court. However, that's not stopped MPs. Robert Jenrick and Nigel Farage have both shared videos on X responding to the news. We thought we'd try and explain why we are constricted on what we could say, because the most important thing when there's any live legal action is that the case proceeds to its conclusion and justice, whatever that may be, is served. How do you balance that if you're in the media? How do you balance it if you're trying to comment on social media yourself? Pia Sama is the Deputy General Counsel at News UK, our great legal expert. Pia, good morning to you.
Morning, Stig.
People really care about this case, very obviously. It's a very important case. It's going to be prosecuted next year. Can you explain the risk of contempt of court when it comes to talking about a case where the trial is pending?
It's really important that the administration of justice, so the process by which a court reaches trial, as you just said, is protected, because ultimately the decisions that are made about someone's innocence or their guilt are made by a jury sitting in a court, having heard all the evidence, sitting before a judge who will very carefully direct them and navigate through, quite dense and complex evidence. And with high-profile cases like this, there is, of course, a lot of media speculation and interest, but of course there are human lives affected, and everyone has a very emotional reaction, and a jury will too. So it's actually a very complex thing for a judge to navigate. And that's why there are these contempt laws, which mean that publishers and broadcasters like the radio and the newspapers, obviously, are limited in what they can say, because ultimately those 12, as they call them, fair men and women who will be called to be jurors, can't be prejudiced by what they hear or see or read before they go into that jury box. If they are, then it might actually change the outcome for the person who's being charged.
And he was charged at two separate occasions. He was charged on the first occasion for the murder of the three girls, and then there's been these subsequent charges afterwards. Are we entitled, is the media entitled to know the basis of those charges sooner than we have done? Is that a legitimate argument? Because there's been accusations of cover-up by Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. They think the government and the police have covered it up. What rights do we have to know the charging decision of the police and the CPS before now?
I mean, as a matter of information flow and the public's right to know, my personal view is that the public has to know as soon as the police know. The question about whether you can comment on what the police have done or not does become a question of contempt, and it's very difficult to try and undermine a police or justice system, the criminal system, because that might then run on to trial and affect what happens at trial. But my personal view is everyone needs to know what the police are doing. There has to be a level of transparency coming from the police, especially in cases like this.
And there probably, just speaking more generally away from this case now, there probably has been less transparency over the last few years when it comes to even people being arrested before charge. There seems to be less information, generally speaking, circulating from police now than there used to be. Is that fair, do you think?
I think that's right. And I think journalists find it very hard to be able to communicate with the public and satisfy the public within the law because of that. And I think that transparency is actually fundamental to the trust in police and the policing system. And that's what society needs.
Have you seen stuff on social media that in your view would be contempt? Because people on social media are drawing all sorts of conclusions. Nigel Farage has issued a video. Robert Jenrick has issued a video. I wonder if people are this may just be the reality that the law has never caught up with the existence of the internet. So we're very careful on this radio station. Obviously, the newspaper, online and in print is very careful. It seems to be two separate worlds, though, the worlds of the traditional media and the worlds of social media, where often conspiracy theories flourish on social media. There appear to be policed differently or the law interpreted or even regarded as actually applying at all differently.
I think people who go online want to talk, they want to debate, and that debate is really central to conversation in society. And on the other hand, they don't understand the laws because they're very, very complex. You need specialists to be able to interpret that for you. So it's either a question of communicating with the public at large and explaining the justice system better, or it's a question of actually reviewing the laws and seeing if they go too far in a digital age. And actually, at the moment, the Law Commission has started a review of the contempt laws. It's a very far-ranging review, which really looks to shake up the whole contempt system. Perhaps now's the moment to look at social media and to see if actually the laws don't work in a digital age.
Because in America, they just say, we trust the jury and we're not going to really interfere very much with what people say to a jury beforehand. And maybe in the digital world, that's the world we may get to eventually.
The media is very free in America, as you say, because they don't have the contempt laws. But they do take steps to do things like what they call sequestering the jury. So they will take them off, they'll put them up in a hotel for weeks on end, they'll cut off their access to the internet, all of that. It's quite severe. You've got to achieve a balance in terms of fairness, in terms of people's rights. And that's always a balance here. It's the balance between free speech and the ability to debate issues that affect society that we've seen happen all through this year, in fact, where people are so emotionally involved, obviously, with the situation that they want to talk, they want to express themselves, and yet the contempt laws hold them back. Where does the balance lie?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll be able to discuss more of this in more detail at the end of the trial, of course, as well. Pierre, great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.